It started with a missing girl. Lena Whitmore was 15, bright-eyed, and full of life. She lived with her single mother, Andrea, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, where everybody knew everybody, or at least they thought they did. On the morning of April 14th, Andrea woke up to find Lena's bed empty. At first, she thought her daughter had left early for school, but then she saw Lena's backpack still by the door. Her phone, always within arm's reach, lay abandoned on her nightstand. Panic set in. Andrea called the police, but like most missing teenager cases, it wasn't treated as urgent. She probably ran away, the officer had said dismissively. Give it a day or two. But Andrea knew her daughter. Lena had no reason to run. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks. Flyers covered street corners. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers searched parks, abandoned buildings, and the wooded areas surrounding the town. Nothing. Then, something strange happened. A neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, an elderly woman who spent most of her time by her window, came forward with a peculiar observation. She had seen Lena walking down Willow Lane on the night she disappeared. That wasn't unusual. Lena had a few friends on that street, but what stood out was where she had gone. The abandoned house at the end of the block. Everyone knew about it. The haunted house, kids called it. It had been empty for nearly a decade after its last owner vanished without a trace. The property was overgrown, its windows boarded up, its mailbox overflowing with forgotten letters. Nobody had lived there in years, so why had Lena gone inside? The police finally took action, bringing K-9 units to search the property. What they found would shake the town to its core. Behind the house, hidden beneath layers of dead leaves and overgrown grass, was a trapdoor. It was heavy, rusted, with a thick chain securing it shut. The officers cut through the lock and pulled it open. A set of stairs led down into the dark. The air that rose from below was thick, stale, and sickeningly warm. The basement was small, barely the size of a single room, but its contents told a horrifying story. A stained mattress lay in the corner, chains bolted into the concrete. An old wooden chair sat in the middle of the room, its arms wrapped in duct tape. And then there was the smell, rot, decay. A freezer, old and rusted, was pushed against the wall. The officers hesitated before pulling it open. Inside were plastic bags. Some held decomposing food. Others held something else, something human. The forensic team worked through the night, identifying multiple remains. Not just Lena's, several bodies. And that was when the case took an even darker turn. These weren't recent disappearances. Some of the remains belonged to people who had gone missing years, even decades ago. A woman from 2003, a man from 1998, a teenager from 2010. This wasn't just about Lena. This was something bigger. The town was in shock. How could such horror exist in their own neighborhood? How could so many people vanish without anyone noticing? Then came the biggest question of all. Who did this? The house had been abandoned for nearly 10 years, but the evidence suggested the killer had still been using it. The freezer had fresh bodies. Someone had been inside recently, and then someone checked the property records. Turned out, the house on Willow Lane wasn't truly abandoned. It was still owned, under the name John Becker. The name meant nothing to most people in town except to one, Andrea Whitmore. When she heard the name, her face went white. John Becker had been her foster father. Memories came flooding back. The strange rules, the doors that were always locked, the basement they were never allowed in, the way he watched them. Andrea had only lived with him for a year before being moved to another home. At the time, she thought she had been lucky. Now, she realized she had survived. The police started digging. John Becker had taken in multiple foster children over the years. Several of them had disappeared. One had been labeled a runaway. Another was listed as missing but presumed found. No one had connected the dots. And then one final twist. John Becker wasn't dead. He wasn't missing. He was still in town. The police tracked him down to a quiet trailer on the outskirts of the city. When they arrested him, he barely reacted, just smiled. In his home, they found more. Trophies, Journals, photographs, a list of names. Lena's name was at the bottom. The horror had been right under their noses for decades. A monster living among them, undetected, unsuspected. The polite old man who waved at neighbors, who shopped at the local grocery store, who attended town meetings. But John Becker had made a mistake. He had taken the wrong girl. Andrea never stopped looking. She never let the case go cold. And because of that, because of her, the truth finally came to light. But the story wasn't over. Because as the police continued to dig, they realized something terrifying. Lena's body was never found. Her DNA wasn't in the basement. Her remains weren't in the freezer, which meant one thing: she might still be alive. And if that was true, where was she? John Becker was a monster, a killer who had been hiding in plain sight for decades, a man who had lured, trapped, and murdered his victims while the entire town carried on, unaware of the horrors buried beneath their feet. But there was one problem. Lena Whitmore, the girl who had led the police to his secret, was missing. Her body wasn't in the basement. There were no traces of her DNA, no proof she was dead, which meant she might still be alive. And if she was, time was running out. Detective Mark Holloway had seen some horrific cases in his time. But this one felt personal. Lena's mother, Andrea, sat across from him in the dimly lit interrogation room, her hands trembling. "She's out there," she whispered. "I can feel it." Holloway wanted to believe her, but he had seen cases like this before. Sometimes hope was the worst thing to hold on to. Still, there was something off about Becker's arrest. When the officers dragged him into custody, he didn't fight. He didn't plead. He didn't deny anything. He just smiled, like he knew something they didn't. Holloway leaned in. "Where is she?" Becker exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was calm, eerily confident. "You think locking me up ends this?" Holloway felt a chill creep down his spine. Becker chuckled. "I'm just the beginning." While Becker was in custody, forensic teams went over the house again. Every inch of it. That's when they found the hidden door. It was behind a crumbling wall in the basement, sealed over with plaster and paint. Someone had taken great care to keep it hidden. Once they broke through, they found a second, smaller room. It was empty, except for a single metal chair bolted to the floor and a camera mounted in the corner. The camera was still running. Holloway's blood ran cold as he played the footage. Lena was in that room, alive. The footage showed her tied to the chair, struggling. Someone walked into frame. Not Becker, someone else. Their face was blurred, their voice distorted. They leaned in close to Lena, whispering something. Then, without warning, the screen cut to black. The timestamp on the video? 12 hours ago. Whoever had taken Lena was still out there. Becker had never worked alone. That much was becoming clear. The police combed through his financials, his phone records, his emails. That's when they found something chilling. A transfer, $10,000, sent from Becker's account to an unidentified recipient just a week before Lena disappeared. A message attached, "Final arrangement in place. Make sure it's done." Someone else was involved. Someone who wasn't in custody. Someone who still had Lena. Andrea hadn't slept in days. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lena's face, heard her laugh, felt the gut-wrenching silence that had replaced her daughter's voice. Then, in the middle of the night, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. With shaking hands, she answered. "Hello." Silence. Then static. Then a voice. "She's still breathing. For now." Andrea gasped. "Who is this?" The call cut off. She tried to redial, but there was no trace of the number. But that voice, she knew it. Somewhere deep in her memory, she had heard that voice before. And that was when it hit her. This wasn't just about Becker. This was about her. Andrea rushed to the police station, demanding to see Becker. She burst into the interrogation room, slamming her hands on the table. "Who took my daughter?" she demanded. Becker's lips curled into a smirk. "Took? Oh, Andrea, you should know better than anyone. Some people don't take. They reclaim. Andrea's breath caught in her throat. Reclaim. Suddenly, she was 15 again. A scared girl in the Becker household. And she remembered a name. A boy. Becker's favorite. The one he never punished. The one he always protected. The one who vanished without a trace when Becker was arrested the first time. Andrea's voice shook. Jason. Becker's smile widened. It took you long enough. The hunt for Jason. Jason Miller. A former foster kid. One of Becker's projects. Andrea remembered him well. He had been quiet, polite, but there was something off about him even back then. Something lurking behind his eyes. The police traced his last known address to a cabin deep in the woods outside town. No neighbors, no security cameras, just miles of trees and silence. Holloway and his team moved in fast. The door was unlocked. Inside, the place was clean. Too clean. No sign of struggle. No sign of Lena. But there was one thing that stood out. A map pinned to the wall. A red circle around a remote area 20 miles west. And a handwritten note. Final arrangement in place. Midnight. Holloway checked his watch. It was 11:23 p.m. They drove in silence, engines roaring as they tore through the backroads. The marked location was an abandoned train depot long forgotten, tucked away in the wilderness. By the time they arrived, it was 11:58 p.m., and then gunshots. Holloway ducked, his team spreading out. Someone was here. The depot was massive, with rusted-out train cars stretching into the darkness. The air smelled like oil and decay. Then, another noise. Muffled. A scream. Lena. Holloway ran toward the sound, his heart pounding. They turned the corner, and there she was. Lena, tied to the tracks. And standing over her, holding a knife, was Jason Miller. He turned to them, his eyes wild, his face twisted in something between a smile and a sneer. You're too late. Holloway raised his gun. Drop the knife. Jason chuckled. You still don't get it, do you? He tilted his head. This isn't just about her. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote switch. Holloway's blood ran cold. You found one house, Jason whispered, but there are others. Then he pressed the button. In the distance, an explosion erupted. The house on Willow Lane was gone, and with it everything they might have missed. Evidence, answers, and maybe more victims. As fire lit up the night sky, Jason simply smiled. The explosion lit up the night sky. Detective Mark Holloway barely had time to register what was happening before the shockwave hit. The abandoned train depot trembled, a cloud of fire and debris rising in the distance. The house on Willow Lane was gone. Everything inside, evidence, clues, maybe even more victims, incinerated. And standing there, bathed in the flickering glow of destruction, was Jason Miller. He held the detonator loosely in one hand, a smirk stretching across his face. That was just the beginning, he said. Then, without hesitation, he ran. Holloway took off after him, his heart slamming against his ribs. Jason moved fast, too fast. He darted between rusted-out train cars, weaving through the depot's maze-like ruins. The darkness swallowed him, the sound of his footsteps fading. Then silence. Holloway slowed, gun raised. His breathing was ragged, sweat slicking his skin. Jason was hiding. A creak. Holloway spun just in time to see a shadow moving behind him. Too late. A steel pipe swung out of the darkness. Pain exploded in Holloway's skull as he crashed to the ground. His vision blurred, the world tilting. Jason stood over him, breathing hard. You're predictable, he muttered. He pressed a boot against Holloway's chest, pinning him down. You think you're hunting me? He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. But you're not the hunter. Jason's grip tightened on the pipe. You're just another piece of the game. Then, gunfire. A bullet grazed Jason's shoulder, sending him staggering back. Lena's mother, Andrea, stood at the edge of the depot, her hands shaking, the smoking gun clutched in her grip. Jason snarled, clutching his arm. His eyes flicked between them. Then he turned and vanished into the night. The minutes that followed were chaos. Officers swarmed the depot, sirens wailing, flashlights cutting through the darkness. But Jason was gone, and Lena was alive. Andrea collapsed beside her daughter, sobbing as she untied the ropes. Lena was weak, trembling, but she was breathing. "Mom," she whispered. Andrea pulled her close, pressing frantic kisses against her forehead. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Paramedics rushed in. Lena was carried away, her frail body wrapped in a thermal blanket. But before they could load her into the ambulance, she grabbed Holloway's wrist, her fingers icy against his skin. "He's not working alone," she rasped. Holloway's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Lena's gaze darted around like she expected someone to be watching. He talked to someone, on the phone. He called them father. Holloway's blood ran cold. John Becker was in custody. So who the hell was Jason talking to? Back at the station, Holloway combed through the evidence they had left. Most of it had been lost in the fire. Jason knew exactly what he was doing. But one thing remained, the list of names. Dozens of them. Children, missing over the past 20 years. Some of them were in the basement, but not all. Some were never found. And next to a few names, written in Becker's precise handwriting, was a single word. Returned. Returned to who? Holloway had spent his career breaking men like John Becker. But when he walked into the interrogation room that night, Becker was waiting. Not just sitting. Waiting. He smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come." Holloway dropped the list of names on the table. "What does returned mean?" Becker didn't even glance at the paper. "You already know, Detective." Holloway gritted his teeth. Who was Jason talking to? Who's running this? Becker finally leaned forward, his smile growing. "Do you believe in family, Detective?" The room felt colder. Holloway didn't speak. Becker chuckled. "Family is everything." Jason understood that. He was chosen, just like I was. His voice softened, turning almost affectionate. "We serve." A sick feeling curled in Holloway's gut. "Serve who?" Becker's smile stretched wider, eyes gleaming. Then he whispered a name that shouldn't exist. Holloway's breath caught in his throat. "No," he said. "That's impossible." Becker just smiled. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "It's his turn now." Holloway practically ran back to his desk, yanking open case files, scanning records. The name Becker had whispered, it wasn't in any criminal databases, but it was somewhere else. An old birth certificate from 1967. The father's name? John Becker. But the mother's name? Holloway's pulse pounded. Because the mother's name belonged to a woman who had been missing for 40 years. And her last known location? Willow Lane. Andrea hadn't left Lena's side at the hospital. She was still in shock, barely able to process the fact that her daughter was safe. But that relief was short-lived, because that night, a nurse brought in an envelope. No postage, no name, just a single piece of paper inside. Andrea unfolded it with shaking hands. One sentence was scrawled across the page. "You should have never left." Andrea's breath hitched. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to a man who should have been dead. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls too close, because Andrea realized something horrifying. John Becker wasn't the real monster. He was just the beginning. Across town, Detective Holloway sat in his car, gripping the birth certificate, Becker's words replaying in his head. It's his turn now. A cold realization hit him. Becker was never the leader. There was someone above him. Someone older, someone worse. Holloway's phone buzzed. A text. No number, no sender, just 4 words. "You're getting too close." And then his engine died. The streetlights around him flickered once. Then total darkness. Holloway reached for his gun. But before he could react, a hand clamped over his mouth. And then, everything went black. Detective Mark Holloway woke up to the sound of dripping water. His head throbbed, and when he tried to move, he realized his hands were bound. The air was damp, musty, carrying the scent of mildew and something else. Something metallic. Blood. He was in a basement. His eyes adjusted to the dim light. The room was unfinished, with cement walls and a single flickering bulb overhead. A figure stood in the corner, watching him. "You should have stayed away," the man said, his voice deep, slow, deliberate. Holloway knew that voice. The name Becker had whispered in the interrogation room. The name that shouldn't exist. The name on the birth certificate. Nathaniel Becker. John Becker's father. A man who was supposed to have died 40 years ago. Nathaniel stepped forward, his face eerily calm. His silver hair was slicked back, his features sharp, chiseled. Holloway had spent his career hunting men like him. But this man, this was something else. This was control. Calculated, meticulous control. "You think you uncovered something," Nathaniel continued, "but all you did was walk into a trap." Holloway swallowed hard, keeping his expression unreadable. "You and your team thought John was the mastermind." Nathaniel chuckled softly. He was nothing but a child playing a role, a puppet. He crouched down, looking Holloway in the eye. "We've been here longer than you realize, Detective." Holloway didn't flinch. "Where's Jason?" Nathaniel smirked. "Oh, Jason did his part well, but he was reckless, too emotional. That's why he failed." Holloway's pulse quickened. "Is he dead?" Nathaniel tilted his head. "Not yet." A door creaked open behind him. Two men entered, dragging Jason between them. He was beaten, bloodied, barely conscious. They dropped him to the ground like a sack of garbage. "You failed me," Nathaniel said coldly, looking down at Jason. "You let your anger get the best of you." Jason coughed, struggling to lift his head. "You used me." Nathaniel knelt beside him, almost gentle. "Of course I did." He stroked Jason's hair like a father soothing a child. "You were never meant to lead. You were meant to obey." Jason's eyes flickered with something Holloway hadn't seen before, fear. Nathaniel stood. "Clean up the mess," he ordered. The two men nodded and reached for Jason. "Wait," Holloway said, his voice sharper than he intended. "You think you can just erase all of this?" Nathaniel turned to him. "Detective, we've erased much bigger things than this." Holloway's mind raced. He had no idea how deep this went, how many people were involved. But there was one thing he did know. He wasn't leaving this place alive unless he did something. His fingers searched behind his back, feeling for the pocket knife he always kept tucked into his belt. It was small, barely enough to be considered a weapon. But right now it was all he had. Nathaniel sighed, as if bored. "Kill him." One of the men moved toward Holloway. In that split second, Holloway sliced through the rope binding his wrists and lunged. The element of surprise worked. He drove the blade into the man's side, twisting hard. The man screamed, collapsing. Holloway grabbed his gun from the holster and fired. The second man went down instantly. Nathaniel didn't even flinch. Impressive. Jason, barely able to stand, took his chance. He reached for one of the fallen guns and turned it on Nathaniel. His hands were shaking, his face twisted with fury. "You ruined my life," Jason seethed. Nathaniel exhaled, disappointed. "And look how weak you've become." Holloway saw it before Jason did. Nathaniel's hand slipped inside his coat. "Jason, move!" But it was too late. A gunshot echoed in the basement. Jason staggered backward, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. He looked down as if confused, before his knees buckled and he collapsed. Nathaniel sighed. Predictable. Holloway didn't hesitate. He fired twice. Nathaniel grunted, stumbling back, but he wasn't dead. Not yet. He clutched his wounded shoulder, his cold eyes locking onto Holloway. "You can't stop this," he said through gritted teeth. "You think I'm the only one? You have no idea what you've just started." Holloway leveled the gun at his head. "I know enough." He pulled the trigger. Nathaniel Becker was dead. But Holloway knew the battle wasn't over. He turned to Jason. The younger man was barely clinging to life, blood pooling beneath him. Jason's lips parted, but no words came out. Then, with a shuddering breath, his eyes went blank. It was over, or so Holloway thought. 3 days later, the FBI took over the case. The fire at the house on Willow Lane had destroyed nearly all the physical evidence. But there were whispers, rumors that Nathaniel had never been the true leader, that the organization ran deeper, that there were more houses, more children. Holloway spent hours going over the files, the names, the missing children. He couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about what Becker had said. It's his turn now. Then, one night, an envelope arrived at his home. No return address, no postage. Inside was a single photograph. A boy, 8, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of a new house. A house that looked exactly like the one on Willow Lane. And on the back of the photo, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, was a message. It never ends.